Welcome to Critical Path Podcast. We are about to go into a story of, well, logistical desperation, political warfare, and some truly, truly bizarre industrial chemistry.
But honestly, it has the single weirdest ingredient I think we've ever covered. We're tracing humanity's, 150-year war against the cow?
It's a war fought for price, for logistics, and now for the climate. But let's just set the scene. 1869, France. The Emperor, Napoleon III, needs cheap, stable fat for his navy. So he funds a chemist, a guy named Hippolyte Mège-Mouriès.
Right.
And Mège-Mouriès wins the prize, and his original recipe for oleomargarine involves taking beef suetso, straight up animal fat, churning it with animal stomach linings for pepsin, and mixing in, you have to hear this, chopped cow's udder.
Yes, chopped cow's udder. He wasn't just trying to copy the look of butter, he was trying to replicate its actual function. He was literally adding parts of the mammary gland back into this fake product to, simulate the natural taste and the emulsifying properties of real butter.
It's so macabre.
It is. It's the original attempt at solving the uncanny valley of imitation food, and it's frankly kind of horrifying.
That is the ultimate example of, resourcefulness or maybe just total desperation. The birth of a global food staple needed a cow's internal organs just to get the texture right.
And what's so fascinating here and why this is so critical to understanding global supply chains is that this entire saga from 1869 all the way to modern oat milk is fundamentally a logistical challenge. It's about decoupling fat and creaminess from the natural constraints of the cow.
Spoilage, scarcity.
The volatility of the whole slaughter and dairy cycle, all of it.
Absolutely. This is Critical Path, where we explore stories and innovations about our global supply chain that connect our world to your everyday life. Today, we're tracing the three great eras of dairy imitation, tallow, hydrogenation, and plant-based, to see how necessity and innovation have constantly tried to outmaneuver the humble bovine.
Okay, so let's unpack that first one, the tallow era. It really begins with a crisis, both military and urban. In the late 1860s, Napoleon III has these two massive problems.
Right.
He needs to provision his fleet with food that won't spoil on these long voyages, and he needs to feed a rapidly urbanizing and, frankly, less prosperous working class. Butter was a total luxury item.
Yeah, it's expensive, and it goes bad so fast. It's a logistical nightmare for a growing empire.
Exactly. So the emperor issues this famous Challenger Prize for a suitable, non-perishable substitute. And Mège-Mouriès, he approaches this not like a chef, but like a true supply chain reductionist.
He's thinking, okay, the cow ultimately produces fat, so why bother with all the inefficient steps? The grass, the metabolism, the milking, I'll just go straight to the source.
He just extracts the cow's structural fat directly. He took beef suet, that's the hard white kidney fat, processed it through what was essentially a kind of cold saponification, and created this pearly white substance.
And he gave it that name, right? Oleomargarine?
Yeah, a really clever name. Oleum for the beef fat or oil, and Margarine for that pearl-like luster of the final product.
So it was cheap, it was stable, and I guess edible. But here's the key logistical turn. Mège-Mouriès' factory, it fails during the Franco-Prussian War.
It does. So he quickly sells his patent rights in 1871 to the Dutch Jurgens family.
And this is where the story gets so much bigger.
This is where it gets huge. That transaction, that 19th century sale of fake butter rights, is the direct foundation of a modern consumer goods giant. The Jurgens family, they eventually merge with the Vandenbergs to form Margarine Uni,
which then merges with Lever Brothers in 1929, and that merger creates Unilever.
Unilever.
Wow. So the idea that you could stabilize and mass market a cheap fat substitute didn't just solve a military problem. It basically created the blueprint for the entire modern consumer packaged goods industry.
That's it. The whole business of selling everything from soap to soup, you can trace its origins right back to solving a cheap fat supply problem.
But the dairy industry, they were not just going to sit back and watch this happen.
Oh, not at all. We immediately enter the Oleo Wars, and this was less about market competition and more. Well, it was outright political and psychological warfare.
The dairy lobby saw oleomargarine as a complete existential threat because manufacturers, they figured out really fast that they could dye the naturally grayish white beef fat yellow to perfectly mimic high-quality butter.
And that ability to fake the color, that was the real danger. So the dairy industry weaponized color through lobbying. In the U.S., they pushed the 1886 Oleomargarine Act, which slapped on this punitive 2-cent per pound tax.
Plus expensive licenses.
But to state laws, that's where it reached the height of absurdity.
We have to talk about the pink laws. In 5 states, including, big dairy regions like Vermont and Minnesota, legislators mandated that margarine had to be dyed a bright, unappetizing pink.
Pink. The intent was pure psychological warfare. If they couldn't ban it outright, they would just legislate into being visually repulsive.
They wanted it to look disgusting, artificial, cheap. They were forcing the consumer to publicly acknowledge their economic status with every single purchase.
It's like the legislative version of saying, you're poor, and we want everyone to know this isn't real butter.
And even though the Supreme Court struck down the pink laws in 1898, the bans on selling pre-colored yellow margarine, those stuck around for decades in a lot of states.
Which led to that incredible mixing bowl era. Consumers bought margarine as this stark white block, and sometimes the manufacturer would give them a tiny little capsule of yellow dye.
So you would go home and do it yourself.
You had to go home, open the block, and manually knead the dye into the fat. You had to physically participate in the fraud.
That is just... It's a constant humiliating reminder that you're a second-class citizen who can't afford the real stuff. What an insane piece of history.
It's stunning. But the tallow era, it solved scarcity, but it created this political war, and it was still dependent on slaughter cycles. To truly democratize fat, they needed a supply chain that bypassed the animal entirely.
Which brings us to the hydrogenation era. We're moving into the 20th century, and this is where we see a massive chemical leap. We go from beef fat to these abundant liquid vegetable oils like cottonseed and soybean.
And the key innovation here is pure chemistry. It's hydrogenation, developed by Wilhelm Norman in 1902. This invention, it fundamentally changed global logistics and diet.
Okay, for our listeners who know their stuff, let's really dig into the technical breakthrough. What exactly is hydrogenation?
So you take these unsaturated liquid vegetable oils. You can think of their fatty acid chains as being sort of kinky or bent on a molecular level, which stops them from stacking up neatly.
Okay.
You then put them under immense pressure with hydrogen atoms, and you use a metal catalyst, usually nickel. And this process literally forces the hydrogen atoms into the chain, straightening it out.
And once the chains are straight, they can stack together.
Exactly. They stack neatly, turning liquid oil into a shelf-stable, solid, spreadable brick of butter at room temperature.
That is a colossal leap in supply chain stability. An abundant, cheap, non-perishable fat source, completely decoupled from the beef slaughter cycle.
And, like almost every major logistical innovation, war just accelerated its adoption. World War II rationing totally cemented margarine's status. Butter was rationed, it was a luxury. Eating oleo became, patriotic.
The federal tax was repealed in 1950. But we have to mention the irony. Wisconsin, the dairy state, kept its ban on pre-colored yellow margarine until 1967.
They were fighting that war longer than almost anyone else.
But here's the ultimate tragic twist of the hydrogenation era. By the mid-20th century, margarine wasn't just austerity food anymore. It was being sold aggressively as a health food.
That's right. During the big cholesterol panic, saturated animal fats became public enemy number one. And margarine manufacturers, they rushed to brand their hydrogenated products, I can't believe it's not butter, as the heart-healthy alternative.
But the irony is it's tragic. The chemical process of partial hydrogenation, the very thing that gave it that perfect spreadable texture, it created an unexpected byproduct.
Trans fatty acids.
And we now know trans fats are so much worse for you than the saturated fats they were supposed to replace.
So much worse. They raise your bad cholesterol and lower your good cholesterol at the same time. For decades, consumers who were trying their best to eat healthy were basically consuming a slow-acting poison.
All in the name of avoiding the cow. So what allowed that to happen? Was it just a failure of regulation, or did science just not understand it yet?
I think it was a confluence of things. You had this aggressive marketing that was capitalizing on the public's fear of cholesterol, combined with a scientific community that just didn't fully grasp the long-term impact of trans fats until, really, the 1990s.
So the logistical solution created a chemical problem that took decades to even identify.
Exactly. Which brings us to today, and the third great era, the plant-based era. We traded the butter wars for the latte wars.
And the real revolution here, it didn't come from the early stuff like soy or almond. Soy had flavor issues, almond was too watery, and as we'll see, an environmental problem. The solution came from the humble oat.
And the pivot here is just a marketing and logistical masterpiece. Oatly, which was founded by a researcher at Lund University, was originally this functional food for lactose-intolerant people.
Right, a medical product, basically.
But the game changed when their CEO shifted the positioning from medical deficiency to a lifestyle choice. the post-milk generation.
And their logistical target was brilliant. High-end coffee shops. They finally solved the uncanny valley problem for plant milks, which is functionality in hot drinks.
Yeah, soy curdles and acidic coffee. Almond milk is way too watery to texture properly, but oat milk, it froths, it holds temperature, it creates that microfoam that baristas need.
Okay, but why doesn't my homemade oat milk taste anything like the barista edition I get in a cafe? That's where the high-tech supply chain comes in.
You're getting at enzymatic hydrolysis. That's the core genius of modern oat milk. If you just blend oats and water at home, you get this slimy sludge.
Yeah, it's gross.
It's because oats are full of fibers called beta-glucans. They also taste like bland starch. So the industrial solution is basically chemical predigestion.
Okay, break that down for us. What are they actually doing?
The manufacturers, they mill the oats, create a slurry, and then they inject amylase enzymes. You can think of them as molecular scissors. These enzymes, they target the long, tasteless starch chains and just snip them into much shorter sweet chains, specifically maltose.
Ah, so when a brand like Oatly says no added sugar, the product is still sweet because they've chemically created sugar during the processing.
Precisely. You're drinking the result of the enzyme's work. That solves the slime and the sweetness at the same time, but it doesn't solve the creaminess problem. Oats have very little natural fat.
So they have to add it back in.
To match the texture of whole milk, they have to inject a vegetable oil, which is typically rapeseed oil or canola.
And there's one more piece for the baristas, right? Something to handle the acidity of coffee.
That's the final puzzle piece. To stop this new oil-water emulsion from curdling when it hits hot, acidic espresso, they add a buffering salt. It's usually dipotassium phosphate. It's an acidity regulator designed specifically for the chemical environment of a latte.
And looking at that complexity, it just reveals this massive new kind of supply chain vulnerability. We saw this happen in 2021 and 2022. Oatly had shortages, not because of a bad oat harvest, but because the product isn't just an agricultural product.
No, it's an industrial formulation. It is entirely dependent on the global edible oil market, on the price and availability of rapeseed oil. And if you connect this to the bigger story, the complexity of the imitation is the core theme here.
Let's just compare them. Traditional salted butter, 2 ingredients. Cream, salt.
Historic margarine, maybe 6 ingredients.
But the prized barista edition oat milk, it's closer to 14 industrial ingredients. So has the logistical solution just traded dependency on the cow for dependency on global oil and chemical markets?
It certainly traded simplicity for complexity. The product we praise for being natural or ethical is, ironically, the most highly engineered of all 3 eras.
And yet, the main reason for all this engineering today is environmental. We're fighting the cow not over price anymore, but over land use and carbon emissions.
The environmental calculus is the new frontier. I mean, structurally, filtering nutrients through a giant mammal is just inherently inefficient. The data, the life cycle analyses, they show dairy is an outlier in land use, carbon, and water.
But the alternatives all have their own trade-offs.
The big ones. Almond milk, for instance, is the water villain. It takes about 371 liters of water to produce 1 liter of almond milk. And 80% of those almonds are grown in drought-prone California.
That's a huge hidden cost.
Yeah. Oat milk is the current Goldilocks. About 80% less land, 80% fewer emissions than dairy. But nutritional density complicates things. Plant milk is often 98% water and relies on synthetic fortification adding calcium D2, B12 to even get close to dairy.
It's a logistical solution to an ecological problem, but it needs its own supplement supply chain. And all of this brings us full circle, right back to the legal battles.
We're fighting the labeling wars redux. The dairy lobby, the National Milk Producers Federation, is fighting tooth and nail to ban the word milk from plant-based products.
Citing the FDA standard of identity that says milk is the lacteal secretion of a healthy cow.
And the tactics are just as aggressive as the pink laws. The EU rejected something called Amendment 171, which tried to ban any imagery that even evoked dairy, a creamy swirl on a carton, or describing a product as buttery.
So why do they fight so hard over the language?
Because once the language is lost, once oat milk becomes totally normal in our vocabulary, the market is permanently disrupted. The fight is to preserve the cognitive monopoly of the word milk.
Okay, so if the cow is too inefficient and plant-based alternatives are these complex 14-ingredient formulations, where does this 150-year quest end?
I think it's ending with precision fermentation. This is the next and maybe the final logistical hurdle. Instead of squeezing oats to mimic milk, scientists are using genetically modified yeast to produce the actual molecularly identical proteins found in milk.
You mean whey and casein?
Exactly. Whey and casein with no cow involved at all. We're moving from the I can't believe it's not butter era of chemical imitation to the I can't believe it's not cow era of biological precision.
The proteins will be chemically real, but the cow is just replaced by a hyper-efficient vat of yeast.
It's the ultimate decoupling, the ultimate logistical efficiency. So the question for you, the listener, to think about is this. Does our inherent human desire for that specific creamy texture, which has driven a century of chemistry and politics, outweigh our constant rejection of the natural source that created it?
That is a deep dive question right there, and one that affects every single coffee order you make.
Indeed.
Thanks for listening and watching. Please like and subscribe, and make sure to check out our other podcasts.